Tommy Caldwell was the bass player for the Marshall Tucker Band. He also sang harmony, wrote songs, and was the one to take the front mic and speak to the audience at their shows. But as you watch this video, you might come away thinking, maybe Tommy even meant more to the band than that. We're not taking anything away from the other 5 members. They all played important roles in creating one of the best acts in Southern rock music back in the 70s. But all bands need that one person to keep pushing and lead them on when the chips were down. And that person in the Marshall Tucker Band just might have been Tommy Caldwell. Thomas Michael Caldwell was born on November 9, 1949, in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He was the first of the Caldwell brothers to pick up a guitar and start to play. He picked up a chord here and there from his father, who also strummed the 6-string. His older brother Toy wasn't far behind him when the music bug caught him too. Tommy would also play drums and later on was to switch over to the bass guitar. He picked up the bass when he was around 12. His first bass was said to be an Old K single cutaway hollow body. Together, the Caldwell brothers would go around playing at dances and parties. While in high school, Toy decided he wanted to play in a rock and roll band. He joined the Ramblers, along with another guitar player named George McCorkle. But that didn't seem to last, and soon Toy and Tommy started a group, naming it the Toy Factory. Sometime after that, Tommy and Toy had a little brotherly disagreement, and Tommy left and started to play bass in another group. That band also had George McCorkle and a drummer named Paul Riddle in it. Later on, Toy was to end up working out with both bands, along with a vocalist named Doug Gray. But some of the band members would have to take leave, as in the time between 1966 and 1970, Toy, Tommy, George McCorkle, and Doug Gray would all spend time in the armed forces. Tommy was the last to join in 1970. Tommy was an honor man of his platoon at Parris Island, but was medically discharged soon after graduation. So Tommy was back with the group, still named the Toy Factory in 1970. They were soon to change their name to the Marshall Tucker Band. Now the story of how the band came upon the name Marshall Tucker, I've covered before in another video I did a year or so back on Toy Caldwell. I'll leave a link to that video at the end of this one and in the description box if you're interested in that information. So the band, now consisting of Tommy, Toy, Doug Gray, George McCorkle, Paul Riddle, and Jerry Eubanks, rented an old warehouse on Spring Street in downtown Spartanburg and got down to some serious rehearsing and working on original songs. From early on, Tommy, like his brother Toy, favored playing with his thumb for the most part. Back when many of the Southern rock bassists favored the pick, Tommy was getting a great feel, tone, and speed out of his thumb. And that speed came in real handy on their live performances, because when the Marshall Tucker Band played live, they kicked their songs up a notch or two. Once they released their first album, they were playing to large crowds, appearing a lot as the opening act for the Allman Brothers Band. Although Toy wrote a majority of the songs for the band, Tommy did write a few, and the two that I thought were very well written and from the heart was Melody Ann and Never Trust a Stranger. Now, Melody Ann was the only song I know of that Tommy sang lead on. He wrote this song for his wife. The other song, Never Trust a Stranger, Tommy wrote for a couple of his friends who were sent to jail. That song is on the Carolina Dreams album. Now, Melody Ann is on the Running Like the Wind album. Give these songs a listen and check out the words closely. Both are very well written. I guess one of my favorite songs by Marshall Tucker was Fire on the Mountain. Now, it was written by rhythm guitarist George McCorkle. He pitched the song to Charlie Daniels, but by this time, the album, which was titled Fire on the Mountain, was already recorded and being mixed. So the Tucker boys just recorded it themselves, and it became a big hit for them. It was always one of my favorites, along with 24 Hours at a Time. What was some of y'all's favorite songs by the Marshall Tucker Band? Leave some in the comments sections. The Marshall Tucker Band's self-titled debut album was released in 1973, and certified gold in 1975, selling over 500,000 copies. All of the tracks were written by Tommy's brother Toy, including Can't You See. But in my opinion, they put a live version of Can't You See on their fourth studio album, Searching for a Rainbow, and that version of the song sounded the best in my opinion. Also, I think the Marshall Tucker Band was one of the bands you almost had to see and hear live to really appreciate how good they really were. As I said earlier, the Tucker Boys kicked it up a notch live compared to their studio versions. Many of their up-tempo tunes were played with an even faster edge to them. The song 24 Hours at a Time is a good example of that. Tommy and drummer Paul Riddle kept the edge on it, and of course, Tommy does a great job on that bass solo. Between 1973 and 1980, the band would release 10 albums, with 6 going gold and 1 platinum, and in 1978 they would release a greatest hits album that would also go platinum. After recording the 10th album in 1980, Tommy Caldwell would die from injuries sustained in an accident where his off-road vehicle would hit a car in town. The oversized tires caused the vehicle to flip over on its side, and even though it had a roll cage and Tommy was wearing a seatbelt, his head would strike the pavement. This would happen on April 22, 1980. He was rushed to a hospital with severe head injuries, and he died a week later in Spartanburg General Hospital on April 28th. He was 30 years old at the time of his death. The band released a 10th album, which was titled 10th, and it was the last album Tommy was to appear on, until a live album released in 2006 titled Live on Long Island, which was recorded back on April 18, 1980, only a few days before Tommy's accident. They would release a few more albums after this, but they just didn't have the feel their earlier music did. After a solid 10-year run and a few unsuccessful albums in 1983, Toy Caldwell, Paul Riddle, and George McCorkle left the band. Here's what many think happened. After Tommy's death, the Marshall Tucker Band was really considering calling it quits. The band had not only lost a brother and a friend, but they had also lost their number one cheerleader and businessman. Most people don't realize that Tommy was considered a leader in the band. After Tommy's death, it was his brother Toy's call, said drummer Paul Riddle. He felt very strongly that Tommy would want us to continue. The band decided to give it a go. They called in longtime friend Franklin Wilkie, who had played with them in the very early years, and they recorded the album Dedicated. A couple of albums later, they could see it wasn't just going to work. In June of 1984, Toy Caldwell, George McCorkle, and Paul Riddle all decided to call it quits. Doug Gray and Jerry Eubanks chose to carry on the Marshall Tucker Band. Doug Gray still carries on today, keeping the Marshall Tucker songs alive. Many feel, myself included, that Tommy was the glue that held that band together. He was a great bass player, wrote songs, and was a front man when it was needed to talk to the audience. He was loved and respected by his fellow bandmates. After his death, it just fell apart for the band. To lose such an important piece, musically and business-wise, they just couldn't seem to recover. On his grave, it reads, "Devoted husband of Melody Ann Hope, composer and bass guitarist, founder and leader, Marshall Tucker Band, veteran, United States Marine Corps." I think that word leader speaks very loud. Comment section's open for your thoughts on Tommy Caldwell. When putting the Allman Brothers Band together, Duane Allman didn't want somebody who just played bass. He wanted someone who was capable of taking the instrument and the music to a different level. In Bertie Oakley, he found the perfect person, in more ways than one. They also had the same thoughts and beliefs on how to make it in music, playing the style they both loved. Raymond Berry Oakley III was born in Chicago and grew up just south of there in Park Forest, Illinois. So how did a kid who played lead guitar in a band out of Chicago end up in Jacksonville, Florida, and become the bass player for one of the most iconic Southern rock bands in history? Fate, destiny, or luck? Whatever you want to call it, this is probably one of the most fascinating stories you'll ever hear. I really do think that Bertie Oakley was never given the recognition he deserved. Yes, he was a great bass player, holding down the Allman Brothers rhythm section with drummers J-Mo and Butch Trucks. If you listen to his playing closely, he would also take it up into the lead section at critical points during a song. He had an uncanny knack of knowing just when and where to do this to get the most out of it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's find out how he got to that point. As I said, Bertie Oakley was born in Chicago and grew up and went to school in Park Forest, a suburb south of Chicago. While attending Rich East High School, Bertie played in a local band called the Shanes. Bertie was considered one of the better lead guitar players in the area back in the 60s. A friend and a fellow musician said Bertie used to play a Forest Green Strat through a 212 Sears Silvertone amp back then, and sounded great. As his band, the Shanes, gained popularity in the local area, they got to play with some pretty big-name acts of the time, including the Byrds. One of the groups they played shows with quite a bit was Tommy Roe's backup band, the Romans. Tommy Roe had some success with hit songs like Sheila and Dizzy, to name a few, and used the Romans as needed to back him on some gigs. The Romans band is where Bertie Oakley got a break. Joe Pappalardo, the bass player for the Romans, was drafted into the Vietnam War. Bertie saw the opportunity, and although he had never played bass, asked him for a shot at the gig. They said okay. Now, Bertie had a musician friend who played bass give him a crash course, and in 2 weeks he was ready to head out. He quit high school and started playing with the Romans. The Romans had formed on the west coast of Florida, just north of the Clearwater Beach area, and they would often play gigs around that area too. So this was the first known time that Bertie Oakley would visit Florida. Now the Romans had another musician in the group who would go on to have success in music, and that was drummer Bertie Higgins. This name might sound familiar with some of you, some maybe not. But Bertie Higgins would end up helping write and then recording a hit with the song Key Largo in 1981. The song would peak at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 and remain on the charts for 17 weeks. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. Now, there isn't much information as to when and why Bertie left the Romans, but one thing we know is he didn't leave Florida. He stuck around the Tampa Clearwater area playing beach bars with a few different groups. Now down south and across Tampa Bay is the town of Sarasota. This is where Dickie Betts was fronting a top 40 cover band called Soul Children. The band played all over the area, and somewhere, somehow, Dickie was to run in to Bertie Oakley, and he really liked what he saw and heard in this long-haired bass player who resembled Jesus. Bertie had dreams and aspirations. He talked with Dickie about doing original songs and getting out of the bar band circuit. Bertie joined Dickie, along with drummer John Meeks, guitarist Larry Reinhardt, and keyboardist Dale Betts, which was Dickie's wife. Now this band became the Blues Messengers. There's one recording out there of the Blues Messengers I found. It's on YouTube, and it's really wild sounding. Not a great recording, but you can hear Dickie and Bertie play in the early years. I'll leave a link to this song. It's called High Wednesday, and I'll leave the link in the video description. Dickie Betts was quoted as saying, besides his bass playing abilities, Bertie Oakley's commitment to working on original music really inspired him. But it also inspired another up-and-coming guitar player who had just left his job as a session player at the Muscle Shoals recording studio. His name was Duane Allman, and he was looking to put a band together. By 1968, the Blues Messengers had migrated through some personal changes and relocated to Jacksonville, Florida, changing their name to the Second Coming. Dickie said, Duane started showing up and sitting in with Bertie and myself with our band in Jacksonville. Duane was planning on going to Capricorn Records with a trio. It was going to be Duane, Bertie Oakley, and J-Mo. Phil Walden, co-founder of Capricorn, had approached Duane and told him to put a group together, a trio. So Duane started showing up and setting in with Bertie and myself with our band in Jacksonville. So Bertie and Duane were kind of getting used to playing with each other, getting ready to go into this new venture. As we started jamming, we all realized that Duane and I played harmony guitars together was something that we weren't expecting to hear. And as legend has it, it was Bertie who refused to leave without Dickie. However, the details were finally worked out. It was around this time the Allman Brothers were born, with Bertie Oakley as a founding member on bass guitar. Duane and Bertie didn't really live long enough to give many interviews, so there isn't very much information that came directly from their mouths about events and how they felt. But one thing that sticks out in my mind, we know that Duane was the driving force behind the band. Everyone says that. But we also know what Dickie had to say about Bertie through countless interviews throughout his life, saying things like, Bertie was convinced there was an audience for the improvisational blues-based music. Dickie ended by calling Bertie a real visionary. So for myself, I have a deep feeling that there was a strong connection and a bond, so to speak, between Duane and Bertie. One thing that we might never know about because, as I said, neither one lived long enough to tell their side, but it sure seems that way to me. Bertie's playing was the perfect match for the Allman Brothers band. He had become a great bass player. Consider this. He started playing bass around the age of 18 and tragically died in a motorcycle accident at age 24. Some of his finest work on albums were done between the ages of 21 and 24. He was just a month shy of his 23rd birthday when the Live at the Fillmore album was recorded. Still, today, it is considered one of the best live albums ever created. His tone was always spot on. He played a Guild Starfire and a Fender Jazz bass for the most part. Now, the Jazz was anything but stock. It was nicknamed the tractor bass. It was customized with a Guild pickup, manufactured by Hagstrom, from my understanding. I could go on about this guitar, but instead, I want to leave another link in the description. This is a link to Bertie's grandson's channel. The video was recorded about 10 years ago, but he explains the guitar and plays it some too. So drop by and check it out to learn more about this guitar and leave a comment for his grandson Sean. Like I said, in my opinion, Bertie was underrated as a bass player. He was a force in the Allman Brothers band. We know he had the attitude needed to take the band to a higher level. Dusty Hill was the bass player and vocalist for ZZ Top from 1969 until his death in July of 2021. I've done videos on Billy Gibbons and Elwood Francis. I can't go any longer without adding him to the channel. He has been gone a year now, so let's take a quick look back on him, and I'll give a few of my thoughts along the way as we take a little time and remember Dusty Hill. Joe Michael Hill, known to everyone as Dusty, was born in Dallas, Texas on May 19, 1949, and he grew up in Lakewood, East Dallas. He started singing at age 8 and playing bass guitar a few years after that. Unlike many bass players, Dusty didn't really start out playing the 6-string guitar. His brother Rocky did that, and when he needed a bass player and a singer for his band, he recruited Dusty for the job. Not much is ever said about Dusty's older brother Rocky, who was born John Rockford Hill on December 1st, 1946. That's probably because Rocky pretty much kept a low profile and was in and out of music his whole life. He was said to have been a great guitarist who enjoyed the art of playing the blues. He said the reason him and Dusty split up was because Dusty wanted to head more into the rock music. I think there was a little more to it than that, but I've never heard or read Dusty himself say anything, so I'll just leave it at that. Rocky, Dusty, and Frank Beard played together in bands what seems to be 3 or so years before all three moving to Houston from Dallas, when the band split up for good. As the years passed, there's been some of Rocky's music surface on YouTube. I'll put a few links in the description below the video. You can hear for yourself. He was really good, so I don't think talent or just wanting to play the blues was the real issues why Rocky's career didn't go further and Dusty and Frank moved on. Rocky died at age 62. A statement claimed he died of undisclosed complications of a medical condition. Okay, let's get back to Dusty's earlier life for a bit. Dusty didn't care much for school and wasn't very good at it. I hated school, Dusty said. My grades were always terrible. Part of the problem was that by the time I was 13, I was already playing in local bars, so school kind of got in the way of that, and I resented it. But I wasn't a total loss academically. I loved history, and that's something I've kept up an interest in. A lot of stories on how ZZ Top came to be, but from most accounts, Frank ended up jamming with Billy, who said he wanted to put a band together and get into more of the blues side of rock. Frank suggested Dusty as a bass player, so the three of them got together for a jam and kept playing together for over 50 years. Dusty playing with the same two guys the rest of his life, to me, this is just an amazing feat. Here's something about the band that shows the kind of guys Dusty and Billy were. When the band took some time off, Dusty said it was to give them time to grow beards, or Texas goatees as he called them, but in reality it was a little more serious than that. It was done because the band really needed a break, and Frank had become addicted to heroin and had to check himself into rehab. The rehab took a lot longer than expected, and after all this came out, Dusty and Billy were asked did they ever consider getting another drummer to replace Frank, and without hesitation, they said no. During this time off is where Billy took off for Europe, and Dusty decided to get a job at an airport for reasons only Dusty knows. It was right before the Beards. We were pretty well known. We were big enough to where we were making really, really big money, and people were starting to know who we were. But we weren't so big that I couldn't go anywhere if I dressed differently and acted differently. So I believe it helped me a great deal. It was my own rehab, but for different reasons. It kept me grounded. One topic that comes around a lot is Dusty's bass playing. I hear a few say, oh, he doesn't play anything complicated. He isn't anything special. Well, it is true. Dusty didn't play anything too complicated on the records or on stage. But it isn't because he couldn't have, had he wanted to. He was a very smart bass player and knew exactly what to play to make his three-piece band move. The pocket work between him and Frank Beard was some of the best you'll ever hear. It might not have been complicated, but anyone who says he wasn't anything special isn't worth arguing with. Dusty cited Cream bassist Jack Bruce and jazz bassist Stanley Clarke as early influences. He said he used to play more complicated bass parts, but came to prioritize composition over complexity. Sometimes you don't even notice the bass. I hate that in a way, but I love that in a way. That's a compliment. That means you filled in everything and it's right for the song, and you're not standing out where you don't need to be. His voice was great, although he didn't sing as much as Billy, but what songs and parts he did sing were always spot on. His tone was the same way. That big old round sound that Dusty described as sounding like a fart in a garbage can was there for a reason. His bass was always loud and full, but it never covered anything up. Billy's guitar could cut right through it and stand out, and Frank's kick was very defined pushing out. It was all done for a reason. Dusty always had a plan on how to keep the band moving and sounding good. Too bad he didn't have much of a plan in 1984 when his girlfriend pulled his boots off and his gun fell out and shot him. Or so the story goes. I've never heard Dusty himself say his girlfriend pulled his boot off. He might have pulled it off himself for all I know. But anyhow, the Derringer fell out and hit the floor and shot him in the stomach. Dusty says, my first reaction was, shit, and then, ouch. I couldn't believe I'd done something so stupid. To this day, I don't know how I could do it, but I didn't really feel anything at the time. All I knew was that I had to get myself to a hospital straight away. So I got in the car and drove there. It was only then when I arrived at the hospital that the seriousness of what I'd done hit me, and I went into shock. But I did recover. When asked if he believed there was a God, he said, yes, I do, but I don't know what or who God actually is. If I did, then I'd be out there spreading the word. The one thing Dusty said that always cracked me up was, when asked if he was a Democrat or a Republican, he answered, I just tell them that I'm a Texan, left to my own devices. I'd never leave Texas. Everything is bigger in Texas. I always wonder how a band survives, especially as long as ZZ Top had. With all the bullshit a band has to go through with just to get started and make a few bucks, and then it makes it in the recording business, and then live through the grind of touring all over the place. How did they do it for over 50 years? Dusty had a great answer for that too. It's a cliche and sounds so simplistic, but it's down to the three of us genuinely enjoying playing together. We still love it, and we still get a kick out of being on stage. We also have enough in common to maintain a bond between us, but the sufficient differences to keep our individuality. And after all this time, we all know what winds up the others and what makes them the people they are. Dusty kept a lower profile than Billy, but still got in his share of the spotlight. His on-screen appearances included Back to the Future Part 3, Mother Goose Rock and Rhyme, the July 29, 2009 episode of WWE Raw, and Deadwood, and as himself in the 11th season episode of King of the Hill, Hank Gets Dusted, in which Hank Hill is said to be Dusty's cousin. He also made an appearance on the Drew Carey Show as himself, auditioning for a spot in Drew's band, but was rejected because of his attachment to his trademark beard, which he referred to as the Texas goatee. Dusty was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of ZZ Top in 2004. Before Dusty left the band to go home and take care of his hip problems, Billy Gibbons says, Dusty emphatically grabbed my arm and said, "Give Elwood the bottom end and take it to the top." He meant it, amigo. He really did. Was Elwood prepared for this? Yeah, it sure seems that way. I guess we will never know for sure, and I'm okay with that. As a fan, it's really none of my business, because one thing I am pretty sure of is, it was handled the way Dusty wanted it to be. Billy, Frank, and Dusty were together way too long to have been through way too much not to have the respect to honor exactly what Dusty wanted. And as I said, I'm okay with that. Dusty left us all a year ago, and this is not a knock on Elwood at all, as I think he might be the only one out there who could have moved into Dusty's spot and kept the band going as he did. And he is doing a great job, and the fans really love him. But losing Dusty took a part of ZZ Top with it. it really hits home that nothing lasts forever. But 52 years is as close as any band will ever get. For those of you who have never heard ZZ Top live, you miss seeing and hearing one of the smartest and down and dirty bottom-end bass players ever. Dusty was a team player and did all that he could until his very last gig to keep his band sounding great and on top. If ever a bass player fit his group, it was Leon Wilkerson. And by that I mean his playing set in the music so well. I know when listening to a Skynyrd song, it's hard to take your attention away from those ripping guitars of Collins, Rossington, King, or Gaines, or the lyrics and vocals of Ronnie Van Zant. But if you do, you'll hear a bass guitar that sets in the music and lays down the right feel needed for them guys to make those songs move. If you believe in destiny, then this guy was born to play bass guitar for Lynyrd Skynyrd. So let's take a quick look back on a guy who I feel deserves a little of the spotlight for all those great Skynyrd songs, bassist Leon Wilkerson. Leon Russell Wilkerson was born on April 2nd, 1952, in Newport, Rhode Island. Then the family moved to Jacksonville, Florida, soon after Leon was born. As a teenager, Leon's interest in the bass guitar started with the Beatles and Paul McCartney. He said he was also inspired by other bassists such as Jack Bruce and Barry Oakley. One of Leon's first bands was the Collegiates, along with Donnie Van Zant, who was Ronnie's younger brother and would go on to become the lead vocalist of the group 38 Special. Leon would then join a group called the King James Version. By this time, Leon was becoming well known around the Jacksonville area as one of the better bass players. And when Lynyrd Skynyrd was in need of one, he was ready. At least playing-wise he was. But at that time, he didn't seem to have his heart in it, because when Al Kooper signed the band and things were starting to take off, Leon did just that and headed back to Jacksonville in his job at the Farm Best Dairy Ice Cream Factory. Why Leon backed out could be anybody's guess. There are a few different stories, but taking everything into consideration, I myself think he was a bit apprehensive and just wasn't ready to take that final step. The recordings that were done in Muscle Shoals and the time sure seemed right, but Leon got cold feet and stepped back. So now enter Ed King. Ed had crossed paths with the band a few times, and when Ronnie gave him a call, it wasn't to play guitar, but bass guitar. Ed says it was hard to fit in, as he didn't feel his bass playing fit in with their style of music. So he had an awkward time, as he put it. But once in, he took to the long, hot rehearsals at the famed Hell House. Also included in his initiation into the band, during his first week, he had to spend the nights at Hell House to keep anyone from stealing their equipment. He said it was hot and a bit noisy from all the alligators. Now, Ed King was a good bass player, but even he knew he didn't have the feel it took, and after the Pronounced album was recorded, the call went back out to Leon. Here's how he describes how he was asked to come back to the band. I left the band and they hired Ed King from Strawberry Alarm Clock to play bass, and my lifelong buddy Billy Powell they brought in on piano. Ed King also did some guitar overdubbing during Pronounced. After they finished the album, they found out I was back in Jacksonville working at the ice cream factory. The guys sent Billy and Bob Burns over to drag me over to where Ronnie was fishing. They told me they had finished the Pronounced album and that Ed King really did not want to be a bass player. He wanted to play guitar, and that they did not have the time to look around for another bass player. So they wondered if I'd oblige them and come back. I said, "When do we start practicing?" Ronnie said, "I'll see you at rehearsal tomorrow." Now what made Leon agree on the spot, who knows? But he was back in for good. As far as the Pronounced album, as to who played what, many different stories on that. Here, as I've done before, we'll just go by what's wrote on the album notes itself. It reads, Ed King lead guitar on Mississippi Kid. Bass on all tracks except Mississippi Kid and Tuesday's Gone. Leon Wilkerson, bass for the group until the album was cut, rejoined shortly thereafter, composed many of the bass parts played on the album by Ed. Now feel free to use the comments section to chime in on the Pronounced and the Muscle Shoals album. As I said in the intro, Leon's style fit the Skynyrd group to a T. But one thing I think goes unnoticed about him was his harmony vocals. Leon was a solid harmony singer. His voice was a good fit, and his phrasing was right there with Ronnie. Leon was a very important piece to the Lynyrd Skynyrd group. Now here's a little fun fact about Leon, who was named Leon Russell Wilkerson. Now I read a few articles saying he was named after pianist Leon Russell. Now that's impossible, because Leon Russell was born Claude Russell Bridges, and he didn't change his name until he was 17 years old when he moved out to California. Now Leon Wilkerson would have been 7 years old at that time. But here's a true fact. Leon Wilkerson and Leon Russell share the same birthday of April 2nd. They were born exactly 10 years apart, Wilkerson in 1952 and Russell in 1942. Out of all the band members who survived the 1977 plane crash, it was Leon who probably came the closest to dying from it. Backup singer Leslie Hawkins, who was put in the same ambulance as Leon, said she remembers seeing him going into convulsions. Leon suffered multiple injuries. Reports said he suffered massive internal injuries with 6 broken ribs and 1 puncturing his left lung, dislodged teeth, a broken nose, left arm, and leg. He lost a tremendous amount of blood, and after getting him to the hospital, his heart stopped twice on the operating table. The left arm injury was of particular concern. It was his fretting arm, and his wounds had gotten infected, nearly costing him an amputation of that arm. Even after he recovered, he had severe nerve damage and minimal range of motion in it, causing him to hold his bass guitar upright for the remainder of his playing days. He would get his guitars modified so he could hold them in an upright position, and it seemed to work well for him. One of the biggest mysteries and controversial Skynyrd stories was how Leon ended up with his throat cut on the tour bus after a show. There's a lot of speculation as to what happened, and I'm going to lean a little to the story told by guitarist Ed King, who was there and found him that morning bleeding in his bunk. This happened in the early 90s in Nashville, Tennessee. Ed said Leon had been really drunk the night before, as he had went to pick up his girlfriend Rhonda at the airport, and her plane was 5 hours late. So Leon passed the time at the airport bar. He says Leon was so drunk at the show that night that he couldn't play very well at all, and most of the band members were pretty pissed off at him. After the show, most of the guys flew back to Jacksonville, except for Ed, Randall Hall, Leon, and Rhonda. Early in the morning, Ed said he woke up and walked to the front to talk to the driver. On the way back to the rear, he noticed Leon's arm dangling out of his bunk and some blood dripping from it. On further examination, Leon's throat had been cut and he was laying there in a pool of blood with Rhonda. They took him straight to the hospital and had him stitched up. Leon told Ed he'd stumbled and must have cut himself in the bus hallway. There was also reports Ed himself had cut Leon's throat. That one I find hard to believe. Ed never really drank and left the band the first time because of all the violence. Rhonda? Maybe. Or like Leon said, he was trashed and could very well have stumbled into something on the bus and cut his own throat. This one's anybody's guess, and you can add more to the story in the comments section if you feel the urge. Leon was found dead in his hotel room in Florida, July 27, 2001. He was 49 years old. Many friends say he had been clean and sober for 18 months prior to his death. According to the autopsy report, Leon's death was accidental and the official cause of death was listed as complications of emphysema associated with positional asphyxia. He also had severe cirrhosis of the liver. The report also stated that Leon was prescribed medication for insomnia, chronic pain, as well as anxiety. You can see here there was some pretty heavy medication found in him. And yes, there are still some saying he was murdered. The Mad Hatter of Southern rock was born to play bass for Lynyrd Skynyrd. Without him holding down that bottom end, the band would not have been the same. I rate Leon right up there with the likes of Barry Oakley and Phil Lesh. I've always thought that Leon was rock solid and always had tasteful lines and great tone. Feel free to leave your Leon thoughts and stories in the comments section. And as always, thanks for watching and supporting the channel.